Security, please escort Mr. Jang, sorry, my husband, out of the building. The room fell silent. 300 people. Champagne midair. Forks frozen over plates. Every eye moving between the woman at the microphone and the man by the door whose face had just collapsed into something unrecognizable. He had walked into this gala as head of strategic partnerships. He had no idea he worked for his wife. He had no idea she knew about the 47 million Korean wons. He had no idea about the court filing, the terminated access, the lawyer already waiting by the exit with paperwork and no sympathy. Jang Min-Joon sent the same message he had sent countless times before, running late, don't wait up. Seo Yeon-Hwa read it without emotion, set her phone down, and finished her dinner alone. Their apartment was immaculate, expensive, and hollow, a carefully curated showroom chosen entirely by Min-Joon. Every detail, from the art to the thread count of the sheets, reflected his taste. Yeon-Hwa had allowed it. It was simpler that way. After cleaning her plate herself, despite the housekeeper coming the next day, she retreated to the second bedroom, what Min-Joon believed was her quiet reading space. Behind a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf, however, was her real world. She sat at a concealed desk and opened her laptop. 47 new emails waited. A quarterly report required her approval. And there was a message from Hyun-soo. He took her to Garosagil again. Same restaurant. He used the corporate Amex. I have the statement. Yeon-Hwa wasn't surprised. 6 weeks earlier, Hyun-soo had handed her a folder filled with receipts, screenshots, and proof of a hotel booking under Min-Joon's name on a Tuesday night he had claimed was a business dinner in Busan. He had not been in Busan. That was the moment she knew. But instead of confronting him, she made a deliberate choice to wait. Not because she was weak or in denial. Seo Yeon-Hwa had built too much in her life to act impulsively. She understood that anger exposes strategy. A careless move would alert him. And she never played in the open. She replied to Hyun-soo with calm precision. Save everything. The party is in 6 weeks. Then she shut down her laptop and went to bed before her husband returned home. At 1:14 a.m., Min-Joon slipped into bed beside her, carrying the scent of another woman's perfume. Yeon-Hwa kept her breathing slow, feigning sleep. She had long mastered the art of being underestimated. While Min-Joon believed he controlled their carefully staged life, he had no idea who he was truly married to. Beyond their silent apartment, Seoul buzzed through the night. And across the city, in a glass and steel building bearing a name no one associated with her, the company Yeon-Hwa had built from nothing continued to operate quietly, profitably, invisibly. Like its owner, it watched. And it waited. Ready. She didn't scream or cry. She set her phone down and ate alone. We've all been there, feeling everything, showing nothing, in a room that suddenly feels like it belongs to a stranger. Yeon-Hwa's story isn't just revenge. It's about a woman done shrinking. If this resonates, share it. Quiet isn't powerless. Seo Yeon-Hwa founded her company at 24 with only 3 million Korean wons, a rented desk in a shared Mapogu office, and a name she invented on impulse, Hyuk-Yeon Holdings, Black Lotus. The name symbolized resilience, a flower that blooms where nothing should survive. It was intentionally disconnected from her identity as a quiet young woman who rode the bus and carried homemade lunches packed by her mother. Anonymity was strategic. Growing up, Yeon-Hwa observed a pattern. Brilliant women erased. Her mother spent decades executing others' ideas without recognition. A university professor who pioneered groundbreaking work was dismissed and spoken over by men who had skimmed her research. Yeon-Hwa paid attention, not just to economics, but to power. She concluded that for someone like her, visibility early on meant vulnerability. So she built invisibly. With the help of her meticulous attorney, Choi Dong-wook, she structured Hyuk-Yeon Holdings through layers of legal entities complex enough to deter scrutiny. On paper, ownership flowed through holding companies, masking the truth. At the silent center of it all, locked away in a single safe, was one name, Seo Yeon-Hwa. The company grew steadily and strategically. It began with data infrastructure, essential but unnoticed. It expanded into enterprise software. Then it launched an HR and talent management platform that quickly became indispensable to mid-sized Korean corporations. By age 29, Yeon-Hwa led a 200-employee company generating revenue significant enough to attract financial press attention. Journalists analyzed the firm's success, unaware of the woman behind it. She granted one interview under a false name and never repeated the mistake. At 30, she met Jang Min-Joon at a friend's wedding. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel seen. He was warm, charming, attentive, and she felt safe. Used to invisibility, his attention felt like sunlight. She told him she worked in consulting, which was not entirely untrue. Before their marriage, Dong-wook drafted a prenuptial agreement with ruthless precision. Min-Joon signed it casually, never reading it carefully, confident. Careless men rarely do. 2 years later, after a competitive executive recruitment process he proudly survived, Min-Joon secured a prestigious role, head of strategic partnerships at Hyuk-Yeon Holdings. He excitedly told his wife over dinner. He praised the company's strong leadership and strategic brilliance, unaware he was speaking to its founder. "That's wonderful," Yeon-Hwa replied warmly. "I'm so proud of you." She poured him more wine. Her expression was open, supportive, and completely unreadable. Oh Sol-ki was not a villain, just ambitious and mistaken. At 29, she believed Jang Min-Joon was a man worth wanting. In the office, he carried himself like power embodied, confident, polished, name-dropping with ease, dressed in suits that signaled status. In a company obsessed with advancement, Sol-ki confused performance for substance. She would eventually learn the difference. The affair escalated when Min-Joon began using his Hyuk-Yeon Holdings corporate American Express card for their relationship. The card, issued for client entertainment and backed by a generous limit, was meant to be used with discretion. Instead, he used it recklessly. Dinner at Baisina. A romantic weekend at a boutique hotel in Yangpyeong. Luxury skincare from a department store in Apgujeong that Sol-ki had casually admired. He remembered small details a skill charming men weaponize. In one weekend alone, he spent 2.3 million Korean wons. Baek Hyun-soo flagged the charge immediately. Before Seo Yeon-Hwa arrived at her real office, located in the same building her husband worked in, on a floor he had never accessed, Hyun-soo had already printed the spreadsheet, the suspicious expenses highlighted in yellow. "Yangpyeong," he said carefully. "He told you he was in Daejeon for a partner summit." "There was no partner summit," Yeon-Hwa replied calmly. "I invented the summit," Hyun-soo admitted. To test what excuse he'd use. He didn't even verify it. Yeon-Hwa studied the 2.3 million Korean wons figure. Her company. Her card. Her money-funding hotel sheets her husband shared with another woman. Something flickered behind her eyes, anger, perhaps, but it passed quickly. "Add it to the file," she instructed. The file was growing substantial, 11 personal charges across 4 months. Restaurants. A couple's massage. Flowers. A necklace from a jewelry boutique in Insadong. That necklace had been returned for store credit Min-Joon later used to buy Yeon-Hwa a bracelet for her birthday. She had smiled when she opened it. Days later, Hyun-soo traced the receipt. It went into the file. Sol-ki knew none of this. She did not know the corporate card belonged to a woman beyond the corporate structure. She did not know the sweet, simple wife Min-Joon described had personally approved the program funding her gifts. She did not know that the company she worked for, the one she hoped would elevate her career, had been built, invisibly and meticulously, by that very wife. But she would learn. The annual company gala was 6 weeks away. For the first time in the company's history, Seo Yeon-Hwa confirmed she would attend, not quietly, but as the keynote speaker. Her outfit was chosen, understated, dark, expensively subtle. Her speech was already written. It was not the speech anyone expected. He bought her a gift with the money he stole from his wife. The bracelet, recycled from a necklace meant for another woman, looked like love, but it was betrayal. She knew. She smiled, turned her wrist, and planned her answer. "Some pain is too precise to waste on tears. It's meant for strategy. If this hit you, share this story." Somewhere, a woman is holding her betrayal like a stone, angry, calm, and unstoppable. She is allowed to be both. Baek Hyun-soo had disliked Jang Min-Joon from the beginning. He never voiced it, but the instinct was immediate. Something about Min-Joon's overly firm, rehearsed handshake at Yeon-Hwa's wedding unsettled him. Hyun-soo had known Yeon-Hwa since they were teenagers studying together in Mapo. He had watched her build something extraordinary from almost nothing. If she chose to marry this man, he would respect it. So he waited. For months ago, the expense reports began to shift. Now, seated across from Yeon-Hwa in a private top-floor conference room, a room not listed on any public floor plan, Hyun-soo placed the completed file between them. The evidence was thorough and devastating. Min-Joon had been using the corporate card for personal expenses tied to his affair. The total exceeded 18 million Korean wons in just 1 quarter alone, and that was only what they could immediately prove. "Let me take this to legal," Hyun-soo urged. "Let me bring it to the board. He's been embezzling from you." "We will dig further back," Yeon-Hwa replied evenly. Attorney Choi Dong-wook was already investigating. But she refused immediate exposure. Hyun-soo pressed her. Why wait? Through the expansive windows behind her, Seoul stretched endlessly, a city filled with structures quietly influenced by her company, though few knew it. Yeon-Hwa explained her reasoning with calm clarity. If she handled this discreetly, Min-Joon would hire a lawyer, negotiate a settlement, and craft a narrative that protected his image. He would frame her as cold, distant, or incompatible. He would preserve his reputation while she dismantled his world in private. She did not want that. "What do you want?" Hyun-soo asked. She met his gaze, steady, composed. "I want him to understand exactly where he was standing," she said softly. "And exactly whose ground it was." Understanding dawned. "The gala," Hyun-soo said. 300 employees. The board. Investors. Partners. For 2 years, Min-Joon had performed confidently within Hyuk-Yun Holdings, believing himself powerful, believing himself respected, believing he understood the structure around him. He had been performing in her theater. Now she intended to take the stage. Hyun-soo leaned back, absorbing the inevitability of what was coming. He admitted, with careful restraint, that he had waited a long time to witness this reckoning, and that afterward, he might need a moment to compose himself. For the first time in weeks, Yeon-Hwa's expression softened into the faintest smile. "You can have 2 minutes," she said. Hyun-soo picked up the file. Everything would be ready. The waiting was nearly over. The annual Hyuk-Yun Holdings Gala took place on the 42nd floor of Signal Tower, surrounded by glass walls and the glowing Seoul skyline. It was an elegant night, attended by 300 employees, board members, partners, and investors. Jang Min-Joon had eagerly anticipated the event. Galas were his stage, rooms full of people to impress, a prestigious title on display, and a wife who was quiet, pleasant, and undemanding. He wore a new suit, rehearsed conversation strategies, and even drafted a LinkedIn post in his mind. He barely noticed that Yeon-Hwa was unusually silent during the drive. She often was. She wore a structured black dress he had never seen before, understated yet commanding. She had styled herself, wore the bracelet he once gifted her, and carried an air of composure that went unquestioned. When they arrived, Min-Joon quickly separated to network. Yeon-Hwa let him go. She instead found Baek Hyun-soo near the staging area. Everything was in place. Attorney Choi Dong-wook was positioned near the exit. Security had been briefed. HR had termination papers prepared. The board chair had been informed that afternoon and fully supported her decision. Even Oh Sol-ki was present at table 7, unaware of what was coming. When the MC announced the keynote speaker, joining us publicly for the first time as founder and majority owner of Hyuk-Yun Holdings, Seo Yeon-Hwa, the room shifted. Confusion gave way to dawning realization. Across the room, Min-Joon froze mid-sip, color draining from his face as the truth reconstructed the last 2 years of his life in an instant. Yeon-Hwa walked calmly to the microphone. She thanked her employees for building the company and revealed that 14 years earlier, she had started it alone at a rented desk in Mapogu. She had once chosen invisibility for survival. I'm done being invisible, she said. Then she addressed a personnel matter. Over 14 months, 47 million Korean wons in fraudulent expenses had been uncovered within strategic partnerships. Legal action had already been filed with the Seoul Central District Court that afternoon. The responsible individual, she announced, was present. Jang Min-Joon. Her voice was steady as she terminated him effective immediately. His system access had already been revoked at 6 p.m. Legal paperwork awaited him at the exit. Security would assist. The silence was absolute. Min-Joon stood stunned, cycling through shock, anger, and disbelief, all publicly witnessed. 2 security officers escorted him out of the building his wife owned. Yeon-Hwa watched him leave. Then she returned to the microphone, her tone warm once more. The company had extraordinary plans ahead. It was time to speak openly about them. The room exhaled. And in the back, Hyun-soo quietly took his promised 2 minutes. The morning after the gala, Seoul was gray and indifferent, but Yeon-Hwa was alert and composed at her desk by 7 a.m. She had slept deeply for the first time in months, genuine, untroubled sleep, knowing that something long held had finally been set down. She brewed her own coffee, watched the city wake through the floor-to-ceiling windows that Min-Joon had never been allowed to see, and prepared for the 9 a.m. board meeting she had called herself. The 7 members of Hyuk-Yun Holdings board arrived with measured energy. Each had received her letter the day before and spent the evening calculating how to react. Chairman Park Sung-il, silver-haired and once skeptical of her, took his seat to her left in a silent show of solidarity. Across from her, Hyun-soo had a stack of documents at the ready, poised like someone who had been rehearsing for months, because he had. Yeon-Hwa began with a simple acknowledgement. Thank you all for coming. I'll be brief. But her briefing stretched over 90 minutes as she methodically walked the board through Min-Joon's fraudulent expenses, the timeline of discovery, Hyun-soo's verification process, the legal complaint already filed, and projected recoveries through civil litigation. Her delivery was precise, authoritative, and devoid of drama, the quiet strength of someone who had never needed to raise her voice to command a room. The board asked questions. Yeon-Hwa answered. Hyun-soo supplemented figures when needed, every step of the meeting rehearsed and anticipated. What she did not reveal, the deeper audit only seen by Dong-wook, was the full scope of Min-Joon's deceit. The initial 47 million Korean wons in fraudulent charges was only part of the picture. When accounting for the 18 months prior to Hyun-soo's review, the true total approached 89 million Korean wons. Some of it was subtle. Vendor contracts routed through a shell entity Min-Joon had established 6 months after joining, small amounts structured to appear legitimate. Calculating or desperate, she realized sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. She presented the amended figure and confirmed that the civil filing now covered the full amount, with a criminal referral submitted to the Financial Supervisory Service. Board member Kwon Ji-hee, the only other woman present and a longtime ally, paused to ask how long Yeon-Hwa had carried this. Yeon-Hwa replied calmly, long enough to be certain. Divorce proceedings would begin Monday, and the prenup was airtight. Chairman Park offered a sound somewhere between amusement and approval. After the board filed out, Ji-hee lingered, offering candid counsel. The anger doesn't leave all at once, she said. Yeon-Hwa acknowledged it, but recognized that anger could transform into a tool instead of a burden. After Ji-hee left, Yeon-Hwa stood alone at the window, pressing a hand to the glass. Beneath the lingering anger, she felt something new, space, wide, clean, and entirely hers. Below, Seoul moved on, 12 million people carrying their own quiet victories and betrayals, unaware of the empire quietly commanded from the top floor. Yeon-Hwa exhaled. She was angry, yes, but she was also free. She won. She executed the plan. And then, alone at the window, she admitted the truth. What looked like patience had been anger all along. How many of us hide our rawest feelings behind words that make us seem in control? It's time to acknowledge it. Anger dressed as patience is still anger, and it deserves to be felt, named, and released. 11 years ago, on a Tuesday in March, Seo Yeon-Hwa sat across from her lawyer, Choi Dong-wook, in his Seochogu office, a cup of tea growing cold between them, as he drafted her prenuptial agreement. He asked if she was certain about the comprehensive structure, and she replied simply, "That's why I hired you." The document, 43 pages long, took 6 weeks for Dong-wook to draft and 2 weeks for Yeon-Hwa to review, annotate, and return with 14 comments, most incorporated fully, 2 prompting brief negotiations, and 1 earning his quiet admiration. She had said plainly, "I built something real. I intend to keep it." Min-Joon had reviewed the prenup for barely 25 minutes before signing it. His own lawyer, a junior associate selected mainly for convenience and a discount, noted 2, slightly unusual, clauses and recommended follow-up, but Min-Joon declined, eager to finalize the marriage. To him, it was a formality, a standard procedure for marrying a consultant with some savings. It was anything but. Article 7, Section 3, Paragraph C of the prenup established that Hyuk-yeon Holdings, including all subsidiaries, holdings, and affiliated entities, remained Seo Yeon-Hwa's exclusive property, predating the marriage and entirely excluded from marital assets under any circumstances. Article 12 addressed fraud explicitly. Any financial misconduct against the other spouse or against any entity under their control triggered immediate dissolution and forfeiture of any asset claims, including those that would otherwise have been joint marital property. In 2 years, Min-Joon had accumulated a few joint assets, their apartment, a shared investment account, and a vehicle. Article 12 stripped him of any claim. The morning after the board meeting, Dong-wook laid the document on the table and reviewed Yeon-Hwa's legal position with calm precision. He explained that Min-Joon's new lawyer might argue the Article 12 enforcement was an overreach or a strategic trigger rather than a legitimate claim. They could offer a settlement designed to tempt her into accepting less. Dong-wook's advice was unequivocal: decline. Full enforcement guaranteed a clean dissolution, recovery of all fraudulent amounts, and left Min-Joon with virtually nothing. Yeon-Hwa sipped her coffee, absorbing the weight of strategy, patience, and execution. At the door, she finally voiced what had been quietly living beside her anger and meticulous planning. He signed it in 25 minutes. He didn't read it. He was marrying me and didn't think there was anything worth reading. Dong-wook reflected gravely. In my experience, those are often the same thing. Without another word, Yeon-Hwa left. In the elevator, descending quietly, she allowed herself a long-awaited expression, something not quite tears, but a softer, human response that had been waiting for space to exist. 11 days of careful orchestration, patience, and strategy converged in this moment of personal release. She had won. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Oh Seol-ki had not slept the night after the gala. She had slipped out through a side exit as Min-Joon was escorted out, her coat half on, face carefully blank, intent on avoiding recognition in a moment that would be discussed for a long time. She had taken a cab home to Mapogu, sat on her couch without removing her shoes, and spent the night dismantling the last 14 months in her mind. The woman she had assumed was just a quiet, pleasant spouse, the one standing at the periphery during the company family day 6 months ago, holding a paper cup of coffee, wearing a simple cardigan, was now being reclassified in Seol-ki's mind. The careful, unobtrusive observation she had mistaken for shyness, the quiet attention to details, and the way she excused herself early from events all pointed to something else entirely. Nobody had known she was the founder and owner of Hyuk-yeon Holdings. At 2 a.m., Seol-ki pulled up the company intranet and examined the organizational chart. At the top, the parent entity read Hyuk-yeon Holdings Founder/CEO, Private. She had assumed private was a legal formality for a founder who had stepped back from operations. The abstraction had stood at a microphone the night before in a black dress and ended Min-Joon's career in 4 sentences. Seol-ki realized she had been operating inside a situation she had catastrophically misread. The authority and power she thought Min-Joon wielded were borrowed, peripheral, a reflection of proximity to something real he had never possessed. Even her recent performance bonus had been approved, ultimately, by the very woman she had been deceiving. The thought settled coldly in her stomach. The next morning, Sol-ki almost did not go to work, hesitating 45 minutes in front of her wardrobe, questioning whether showing up was courage or delusion. She went because she had done nothing illegal, needed the job, and had not endured a difficult family, a scholarship, and 4 years of career building only to be chased out over a man's deception. She sat at her desk, opened her computer, and began her work. At 11 a.m., her desk phone rang. "Ms. Oh, the CEO would like to see you at 2 p.m. if you're available." Her hand tightened on the receiver, and she agreed. At 1:58 p.m., she arrived at the top floor, stepping into an office she had never known existed, clean, minimal, with a view that recalibrated her sense of scale. Seo Yeon-Hwa stood at the window, neutral in expression, neither warm nor cold, entirely without concealment. Yeon-Hwa asked directly whether Sol-ki knew Min-Joon was stealing from the company. Sol-ki admitted she did not, and that she had only recently begun to understand what was real about him. Yeon-Hwa acknowledged her honesty, confirmed her strong performance record, and informed her that she was not being terminated. Instead, she was offered a transfer to the Busan office, a clean start with the same position and salary. At the door, Sol-ki apologized, feeling her words insufficient. Yeon-Hwa simply acknowledged them. "Go build something real, Ms. Oh," she said. Sol-ki nodded, descended in the elevator, and decided firmly, quietly, that she would never again confuse the appearance of power for its reality. She had seen the truth, and it would guide her from now on. Min-Joon called 17 times in the first 3 days, but Yeon-Hwa didn't answer. She had moved into a service department in Yongsan, quiet, minimal, and entirely hers, while lawyers processed the marital home. She took very little, some books, her desk lamp, and a framed photograph from her first cramped office in Mapogu. She left the curated furniture, artwork, and expensive thread count behind, letting Min-Joon explain to his lawyer why the apartment he wanted as a marital asset contained items he had chosen for a life he had quietly hollowed out. On day 4, his lawyer sent a letter. Yeon-Hwa read it with Dong-wook, who summarized, Min-Joon claimed the gala was a deliberate public humiliation meant to prejudice criminal proceedings and requested an emergency injunction on the FSS referral. Yeon-Hwa noted the creativity but knew it wouldn't succeed. Dong-wook explained Min-Joon's strategy. He would try to reframe himself as the injured party, publicly exposed and professionally destroyed, arguing that the disclosure was harmful rather than a legitimate response to wrongdoing. Yeon-Hwa paused. "Was he wrong?" she asked. Dong-wook asked, "About which part?" She replied, "The harm. I chose the gala specifically. I could have done this quietly, through HR, a quiet termination, and a civil filing. Nobody would have known beyond the board and the legal team. I chose the room." Dong-wook acknowledged this without judgment. She added, "I wanted him to understand what he was standing on. Maybe that's the same as wanting him to suffer." Dong-wook said quietly, "Maybe they're not mutually exclusive." She reflected on the bracelet, the 17 missed calls, and a man who had built a life performance atop the architecture she had constructed over 14 years, who had charged hotel rooms, signed fraudulent expenses, come home, kissed her cheek, and never asked what she was thinking. She thought of herself at 24, alone at a rented desk, believing invisibility was the safest path to build something real. She realized she was done performing, even for herself. Her feelings were not guilt, but the complicated satisfaction of a woman long underestimated, acting strategically with evidence. She was not proud of every part, but she would not apologize. Tell his lawyer the FSS referral stands, the civil suit continues, and if he wants a clean divorce, Dong-wook is available Thursday, she instructed. Dong-wook confirmed. She added, straightening her jacket as she moved toward the door, "I'm not available at all." When Min-Joon came to her building, she declined to meet him. Alone in her sparse apartment, with only the things she chose, she looked out at the city. He called it betrayal. She called it an exit strategy. The difference in framing was the whole story. 6 weeks after the gala, Hyuk-Yeon Holdings announced a leadership transition. The press release revealed that the founder and majority owner, previously operating under a private structure, would now assume the role of public-facing CEO. A photograph accompanied the announcement, but no explanation was offered. Yeon-Hwa saw no reason to give anyone a story they hadn't earned. The news spread quickly through financial media, tech blogs, and social threads, where people pieced together what had always been happening. The shadow CEO behind one of Korea's fastest-growing companies had been here the whole time. Yeon-Hwa limited herself to one interview, choosing the journalist and the questions carefully. Across from Lee Jae-eun, she explained why she was stepping into the light. Early in the company's history, visibility had been dangerous. Being seen would have cost her something she wasn't willing to pay, so she had stayed hidden. But over time, invisibility had become a habit, then a cage. Recent events, the gala, the board meeting, and the quiet moments in her Yongsan apartment made her realize the younger version of herself no longer needed protection. When asked what she wanted people to know, Yeon-Hwa spoke clearly. This company was built by a woman who was not supposed to be able to build it. Conditions, assumptions, and structures were never designed with her in mind, yet she had worked around them. Now she wanted the next woman in her position to build openly, without performing invisibility first. When asked what she would build next, she smiled genuinely, something better, chosen freely. The divorce was finalized cleanly under the prenup. That evening, Hyun-Soo took her to a small, unpretentious restaurant in Yeoljiro, one he had known since university. They didn't talk about Min-Joon, the gala, or the civil suit. Instead, they discussed the company's future, its expansion into Southeast Asia, and a mentorship program for young women in tech, the 24-year-olds at rented desks who needed to know that what they built in the dark was worth building. At the end of dinner, Hyun-Soo asked if she was happy. Yeon-Hwa reflected, realizing she was clarity before happiness. "I think I'm getting there," she said. They toasted. Outside, Seoul carried on with countless private stories. Yeon-Hwa had stepped out of the shadow she had created, and the light, while revealing, was warm. The ghost was gone. Seo Yeon-Hwa had arrived, and she was only just beginning. She built an empire in the shadows, survived betrayal in silence, and claimed her life in the light not for revenge, applause, or proof, but because the younger version of herself no longer needed protecting. How many of us are still living in structures built for who we once were, hiding behind survival habits that have become cages? Yeon-Hwa didn't just leave a bad marriage, she left the story she thought she had to be safe. This is your reminder. You built something real, quietly, through the hard years, when no one was watching. You are allowed to stop shrinking and start standing in it. Follow, subscribe, and share with the woman in your life still invisible. Her ghost era is over. Her story isn't finished. Neither is yours.